Wilfredo's power was nothing short of devastating. With 44 wins and 42 knockouts, a 32 knockout win streak, 17 title defenses with 17 knockouts, a record that includes multiple Hall of Famers, a gold medal in the 1974 World Boxing Championships of Havana, Cuba, with a record of 96-3 in the amateurs, Wilfredo's moniker Bazooka was well fitted. Win or lose, Wilfredo always fought for Puerto Rico and his fans. It's a relationship that would take Wilfredo to euphoria and to other places he would describe as the worst in his life. Born in 1956 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Wilfredo was one of two kids to Jacobo and Paula. Jacobo, like many in Puerto Rico, loved boxing. So when away from driving the taxi, Jacobo would organize fights for the kids in the neighborhood. Wilfredo was then introduced to his lifelong love. After giving a go at all the other sports, Wilfredo knew he found the one. Once he visited the gym, the rest was history. Wilfredo dedicated every waking breath to fighting. After becoming a local legend in Puerto Rico's amateur scene and failing to go deep in the Central American and Caribbean games in Santo Domingo, Wilfredo had his shot at redemption in the form of the 1974 World Boxing Championship. Little did Puerto Rico know they had a new gold medalist. Wilfredo defeated a legendary amateur from Cuba by the name of Jorge El Toro Luis Romero. The showcase of devastating power earned Wilfredo the nickname Bazooka. After the match, realizing the unpolished gem Wilfredo was, the Cuban national side offered him an all-inclusive boxing education, an offer he would refuse to seek a professional career. This would earn Wilfredo the respect of the international boxing scene as well as the Puerto Rican people. He would turn pro and sign with manager Yamil Shad, a character whose influence in Wilfredo's career cannot be understated. Yamil allowed Wilfredo to focus on boxing exclusively. In addition to his managing of anything Wilfredo needed taken care of, Yamil also had deep connections in the boxing world, specifically with the WBC. Part of those connections were in Panama. Yamil could set up Wilfredo with the structure to become the best in the world. Panama at the time was going through their golden age of boxing. In 1972, Panama had 4 world champions and a Roberto Duran in the furnace. With the structure and support, Wilfredo was primed to be a future world champion. He would now be polished by the Panamanian School of Boxing, but this would not be without any obstacles. After his first pro fight, which ended in a draw, Wilfredo's hand suffered an injury related to punching people in the face. Yamil, his manager, was not happy with the draw, and the injuries to the hands were reaffirming the doubts of his investment. Yamil would later, after the fight, offer Wilfredo's contract to other managers for a measly $20,000. After no one took the offer seriously, Yamil never spoke of it again. Wilfredo found out of this and it would change the relationship forever. In his next fight, Wilfredo looked to prove his manager and doubters wrong, knocking out his opponent in the first round to start a 32 win streak that included 32 knockouts. As his career grew, so did his popularity and legend. From 1977 to 1881, Wilfredo was untouchable. He had the money, the women, the belts. The super bantamweight division might have been a new weight class in boxing, but Wilfredo ruled it like he already was the all-time great. His first belt came against Don Kyung Yoon. It would be a crowning of the new king in the super bantamweight division. He would go on to defend the title 17 times successfully, breaking Roberto Duran's record of 10 successful title defenses and 10 knockouts. Wilfredo nearly doubled the record with 17 title defenses and 17 knockouts. His career would be filled with wins against opponents from different skill levels. One thing for certain was that Wilfredo ran from no one, and even less so in the ring. Wilfredo would fight at the time active boxing legends like Carlos Zarate, who was undisputed king of the bantamweights. Zarate was 52-0 with 51 knockouts, a bona fide knockout artist, and to add insult to injury, he was 3-0 against all Puerto Rican fighters. In my opinion, this would be the first fight to solidify the rivalry between Mexico and Puerto Rico. Many articles cite Sixto Escobar versus Rodolfo Baby Casanova as the first chapter in the rivalry. or even Salvador Sanchez versus Wilfredo Gomez as Chapter 1. But Zarate had no equal in boxing at the time, and he had a record that even a heavyweight would envy. Zarate would be named Fighter of the Year by Ring Magazine in 1977 in the lead up to the fight with Wilfredo. Zarate would enjoy a wide margin of experience in championship level boxing, a height advantage of 5 inches. Doubling his opponent record in knockouts, Zarate was a clear favorite when he moved up in weight to challenge the undervalued Wilfredo Gomez. But even with the numbers against him and the press whispering this was Wilfredo's biggest test, he was radiating confidence. This can be seen in the pre-fight interview where his interviewer is dumbfounded that Wilfredo predicts an easy victory over the living legend.
Para decir que puede ser incluso la pelea más fácil de tu vida, cuando yo la catalogué la más difícil. En primer lugar, soy más joven que él, boxeo más que él.
In the end, Wilfredo proved that he too was a legend himself, stopping Zarate and knocking him down 4 times until his corner threw the towel. After the fight, there would be rumors that Zarate was not fully healthy since he was fighting a cold. But the truth is that Wilfredo was just entering his prime, and the fight against Zarate was his coming out party. Zarate, even though undefeated at the time, was a fighter with many wars under his belt. It was clear that even boxing legends of the sport were to be on notice. Round 1 of the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry was in the books, and it was a 10-8 round for Puerto Rico thanks to Wilfredo's stoppage of Zarate. Wilfredo was no stranger to fighting legends though. 2 fights prior to Zarate in Puerto Rico, Wilfredo had traveled to fight another undefeated legend, Sagat Peyit. You might know him better as Sagat, the main boss in this little game called Street Fighter. Yes, that guy. That's him. He was the inspiration for Sagat. Capcom creators took inspiration for the character from watching Sagat fight in Japan. Legend goes that Sagat had beaten the who's who of Muay Thai in Thailand and no one wanted to fight the man. So he said, fuck it, and picked up boxing to try to become a world champion. That's how Wilfredo ended up flying to Thailand to fight the legend of Muay Thai in his hometown. Sagat was from a lineage of great Muay Thai fighters. His family business was to become legends in fighting like his father and grandfather did. The fight took place in front of 40,000 fans that created a traffic jam 3 kilometers in length. The stadium was so full that the makeshift bleachers collapsed prior to the fight starting, injuring 300 and 10 of those injuries being fatal.
Stadium, you know? Yeah, call it stadium. Many people die.
Was Sagat inexperienced in Western style boxing? Yes. But it did not change the fact that he was a legend and striking was not foreign to him. In my eyes, this is one of boxing's biggest crossover fights, often overlooked, mainly because of age, but also because of lack of footage and lack of coverage from the Western sports media. So before Wilfredo fought Zarate, he had fought 2 legends in their hometown and successfully defeated both of them. But 51 knockouts are hard to argue against, and Zarate was the favorite. After Zarate, Wilfredo would put the boxing world on notice, and the spotlight, whatever left of it, was shined on him. You see, during this time in boxing, Latin fighters in heavier weight classes who fought in America had the majority of the coverage. Whether it was a decision made by his manager Yamil to keep Wilfredo in Puerto Rico the majority of his fights is not known. But fighting the majority of the time in Puerto Rico and not speaking English meant that Wilfredo's airtime was limited. The Zarate fight moved Wilfredo into the #1 coveted pound for pound list by Ring Magazine, and he did it by stopping the previously ranked #1 Carlos Zarate. A win in these circumstances catapulted his confidence, and he became a world superstar overnight. Wilfredo would continue with 10 more consecutive dominant wins. From 1978 to 1981, there was only one true champion in the super bantamweight division. Anyone to say otherwise would be knocked out or stopped. All challengers were welcome. During these 10 fights, Wilfredo would mix in mandatories by governing bodies of boxing, warm-up fights not on record leading up to defenses, and even sweet revenge in the form of Derek Holmes. Wilfredo had only lost 3 times in the amateurs. One of those times was to the hands of Derek Holmes in the North American Boxing Championships in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wilfredo and Holmes found himself competing not only in the ring, but out of it as well. You see, Wilfredo in his life has been known to have an affinity for beautiful women. Many recount stories how this charismatic Puerto Rican would always have an actress or model by his side. Even until recently in this video, we can see Wilfredo being flirty with the beautiful woman interviewing him. So when Wilfredo and Holmes were both trying to pursue the same young woman, Wilfredo, the charismatic playboy, got the W. Holmes would then knock out Wilfredo in the first round to even out the score. He would later be quoted, "He got the girl, I got the trophy." Oof, that's cold-blooded, Derek Holmes. It would be a loss to motivate Wilfredo from that day onward. All of that came roaring back in August 22nd of 1980 in the Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. Wilfredo would then avenge his loss to Holmes. Completely outclassing and dumbfounding the fighter, Wilfredo looked absolutely dominant. At the time, Holmes was ranked number 8 by the WBC, but to Wilfredo, rankings did not matter. He wanted to get even for his knockout loss, and now in the pros, he had his chance to make Holmes pay. Wilfredo was eager to prove that the loss was just a fluke. The destruction of Holmes made it clear that any advantage Holmes had over Wilfredo, time had eroded it. Holmes would even stagger Wilfredo on some occasions, but to no avail. After the match, Wilfredo would call out Salvador Sanchez to challenge the growing legend for his WBC featherweight belt.
Races are underway with Don King for him to evade Salvador Sanchez, and what a fight that would be in November, sometime in November in Caesars Palace.
Not only would this be a super fight in the lower weight divisions, but also one of the biggest fights in the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry. Whether Wilfredo can overcome the physical challenges in a higher weight class with Salvador Sanchez's skill set remained to be seen. What was certain is that Wilfredo was at the peak of his career. He had conquered every adversary he had faced up to date, and any open questions Wilfredo answered in knockouts. I previously in this channel discussed Sanchez, so I won't go too deep into his build-up. If you want to know more, check out my video on him. I'll add the link in the description box. Salvador Sanchez at this point in his career was in a completely different spot than Wilfredo. By the time they met in the ring, Wilfredo was enjoying the spoils of a king. Meanwhile, Sanchez dedicated every waking moment to become a better fighter. Sanchez maintained fighting weight year-round when Wilfredo was a notorious weight gainer. Sanchez was relatively unknown in the boxing world as mostly he fought in Mexico and coverage of him by American media was very limited. But as heavyweights and welterweights started to age, Don King needed a fresh talent pool to keep the money train going. That would present itself in the form of Salvador Sanchez versus Wilfredo Gomez in what was dubbed the fight of the little giants. You see, Wilfredo was having trouble making weight, and overindulging away from the gym did not aid the situation. After beating Zarate, it was clear that Wilfredo was too much for the aging legend, so the next step was obvious. After clearing his division and beating the boogeyman of the division below him, it was now time for him to move up. At the time, Sanchez was yet to be on the radar, and Danny Little Red Lopez was the belt holder in the featherweight division. But life would have other plans, and after a failed negotiation between both sides, the fight fell through and Lopez fought Sanchez. Wilfredo on his part continued defending his belt and kept adding knockouts to his record. Sanchez though was clearing the featherweight division and had beaten the champion, past champions, and championship contenders alike. He was now the undisputed king of the featherweight division. Sanchez was eager to add a living legend to his resume, and Wilfredo was more than willing. Wilfredo was far from the focused young man that was training in Panama. He now lived in Puerto Rico where he enjoyed the spoils of being a boxing hero. By many accounts, Wilfredo's focus started to veer from boxing. At this point in his career, Yamil was no longer manager and Wilfredo stepped in to negotiate his own fights. All in the meanwhile, he beat fighter after fighter, relying on skills and power to carry him. Meanwhile, Sanchez was a workhorse and earned the nickname the Iron Lungs, thanks to his deep conditioning. It was clear to everyone that Sanchez and Gomez would have to fight to settle who's the baddest little man at the time. In his book, A Fire Within, Wilfredo recounts that he did not see Sanchez as a big threat. And looking at Wilfredo's career, it's not too hard to see why. After all, this is pre-internet, and unless you watch fights live, you did not know a fighter unless he was on TV. Sanchez flew under the radar for many, including Wilfredo's. From all mistakes Wilfredo has committed, underestimating Sanchez was the one that would cost him the most. Sanchez was eager to teach the flamboyant Puerto Rican a lesson and wanted to punish him while doing so. Sanchez even told him to take a good photo before the fight because he won't be able to recognize himself after he's done beating him. But he still needed the scalp of a legend to make his collection complete. It was the Wilfredo Gomez fight that put Sanchez on the #1 pound for pound. Stopping Wilfredo was the cementing of a legend of Sanchez, and rightfully so, having stopped a legend like Wilfredo Gomez. Sanchez proved that you either come at 100% or you don't come at all. Completely dominating the Puerto Rican and bringing his own words into fruition with his fists, Wilfredo had lost for the first time in his career in a manner that was more than worrying. The boxing world wondered if this was the end of his career. Wilfredo was now in unfamiliar territories, and the last loss was so long ago it could have been a lifetime. Wilfredo was 11 pounds over on fight week. An hour before weigh-in, he was in a sweatsuit running around a golf course trying to shed the last 2 pounds. After the fight, Sanchez became the world superstar and the ceiling was the sky. Beating Wilfredo now gave him the credentials to call the shots, and he had Alexis Arguello in his sights. This loss would be hard for Wilfredo and for Puerto Rico. He went into seclusion and isolated himself. After weeks, Wilfredo had pieced together his ego and he was back to business. Determined to prove he was not done, Wilfredo dedicated every moment to getting the rematch with Sanchez. In Wilfredo's mind, if he had focused in the second fight, he would beat Sanchez. But that second fight would never come into fruition. Sanchez would pass away in a tragic accident nearly a year after the fight with Wilfredo. The sudden death of Sanchez devastated Wilfredo in the boxing world. Wilfredo recounts in his book how after receiving the news, he felt emotional and didn't know what to do with boxing. His entire mission was to avenge his loss to Sanchez. What people didn't know was that Jose Suleiman at the WBC wanted Wilfredo to drop the super bantamweight title so Lupe Pintor, a good friend of his, can take over the division. So after losing to Sanchez and refusing to give up the title, Jose Suleiman forced Wilfredo to take a 4-fight contract where he would defend his title 4 times consecutively or be stripped. This is why the rematch did not happen immediately how Wilfredo and the boxing world wanted. When Sanchez passed away, Wilfredo had lost all his motivation to continue fighting. Sanchez passed away on August 12 of 1982, and Wilfredo had his fight to defend his title on August 18th, 6 days later. This did not stop him from flying out to Mexico to attend the burial. It was an act that many in the boxing community would respect him for. He now had the love of the Puerto Rican fans and the Mexican fans alike. The loud, blasé Puerto Rican who at one point almost seemed unbearable was showing a side that many superstars rarely do. His genuine pain and loss could be seen by everyone around him. Wilfredo returned to Puerto Rico and knocked out his opponent in 7 rounds. The last of his 4 mandatories the WBC asked of him would be against Lupe Pintor, who was red hot at the time. Questions still persisted around his career, having beat Zarate in somewhat suboptimal conditions and losing in devastating manner to Sanchez. The eyes were on Wilfredo to prove he still wanted it, even though he wasn't a super athlete anymore. The fight with Pintor was labeled Fight of the Decade. It was a continuance of the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry, and Wilfredo again found himself writing another chapter. Pintor was known as a hard-hitting Mexican with a granite chin, deep conditioning, and above average boxing skills. He would go down as one of the best Mexican fighters in history. The fight was a technically loaded brawl that exhibited both fighters' hearts, skills, and chins. Wilfredo in particular, at one point had to be carried back out to his corner. How they let the fight continue, I have no clue. But having let it continue would be for the benefit of Wilfredo, even though it didn't look so at the time. The boxing match had turned into a test of will and neither was willing to quit. But in the 14th round, Wilfredo's power showed up, dropping Pintor and proving once again he was still great. The fight stole the night and Wilfredo got the nod he so much desired. This fight was about showing he still was a great fighter. At this stage of his career, Wilfredo added another signature win over another legendary fighter, putting to bed any questions after the Sanchez fight. Having met his obligations and dreams at 122 pounds, Wilfredo vacated the title he defended 17 times successfully. He now again looked to conquer the featherweight division. Even without Sanchez, it was a stacked division with very good talent. After beating Pintor, Wilfredo took 2 fights in 1988, which by his means are considered paydays. He would be fighting a talented young Puerto Rican from New York called Juan Laporte. Juan had skills to be in the top 5 of any generation and even the top of the division if it was not filled with future Hall of Famers. This guy ran from no one and had already fought Sanchez, giving him a hard fight where Sanchez had to resolve with his greatness. But that was the problem with Juan Laporte. He was a very good fighter, but he was not a great fighter. Through his career, he would fall short against every single Hall of Famer he faced. But that's not to make less of the fighter. He never backed away from a fight and his skills were on par with elite fighters. But whatever it was, whether it was luck or mistakes on Juan's part, whenever it came to the biggest fights, he seemed to fall short. Hence why many thought that the fight against Juan would be easy work for the challenger. He was a smaller man, but he was the one with the proven record. He was the one who conquered divisions in midst of the sport. The fight would be in Puerto Rico in the Roberto Clemente Coliseum. Wilfredo would beat Juan Laporte in a fight where a clearly aging Wilfredo no longer was the young dominant force he once was. The battles and wars had worn on Wilfredo's mind and body. Now at the later end of his career, he was finding himself taking more blows than often. Wilfredo was not afraid to get hit, but he was not known for taking punishment in every fight. It would also be the first decision in Wilfredo's career. With a new conquered division and a win at home, Wilfredo was back on top of the world. But that time at the top would be short-lived. Nearly 8 months later, Wilfredo would defend his belt against future Hall of Famer Azuma Nelson from Ghana, Africa. Considered by many the best boxer to ever represent the continent of Africa. He had the heart, chin, pop behind his punches, and skills to compete with anyone at the time. In lesser words, Nelson was no run-of-the-mill opponent and Wilfredo would again commit the mistakes that costed him the fight with Sanchez. The fight was in Puerto Rico and Nelson knew he had to knock out Wilfredo. Meanwhile, Wilfredo trained, but now with the attention required to beat a man like Nelson. Knowing he was not concentrated, he resorted to other methods like he did with Sanchez. But instead of being brash and flamboyant, he took a very devious approach. Story goes that Wilfredo's team sent some of Puerto Rico's best-looking women to weaken the legs of Nelson, but Nelson, being a man of faith, denied the visits of the women. And on fight night, when Nelson was trying to warm up, the AC was cranked up high, even though they asked multiple times to turn it down at no avail. To add insult to injury, 3 days prior to the fight, Wilfredo took a night off to party until 5 a.m. It was panic mode for his team to get their man to make weight for the fight. The fight would show that Wilfredo no longer had any business in the ring with elite fighters. After being able to be competitive for the first 4 rounds, Wilfredo faded and it was survival mode from there on after. His punches no longer had the same effect and he no longer had the gas to go the distance. Nelson, on the other hand, was landing hard and clean punches, rising like the wave. When Wilfredo was being punished, the crowd stood up in disbelief as they saw the dismantling of their biggest champion in their hometown. It was disbelief that the once great champion would be stopped in such a manner. It would be Wilfredo's last meaningful fight. I say that because he would go on to fight 4 times in 5 years and even won the super featherweight title against Rocky Lockridge in a highly controversial decision that many saw as a gift to Wilfredo. Wilfredo would continue to fight for reasons only he can answer at the very end. His last fight was at the Diplomat Hotel in Hollandale, Florida. He was out of shape and clearly not the same fighter who once fought Nelson. He was a shell of his former self. Even reading the book and watching the fight, I can't help but feel emotional. The man who used to fight in front of thousands now fought in some obscure place in Florida. Now, it's a very nice hotel, don't get me wrong, but Wilfredo, by the opinion of many, had no business fighting in such circumstances. He was boxing royalty and it hurt fans seeing him fight. Interesting enough, Wilfredo did not fight for money. From what I could tell online, Wilfredo was smart with his money. Investments the fighter made had assured he did not depend only on boxing, but yet he wanted to keep on fighting. The cat-like reflexes were no longer there and the beautiful boxing existed no more. Wilfredo would retire after that fight in Florida. No great going away tour, no big card in Las Vegas, no promotional campaign to remember his legendary career. He walked away from it all in silence with no goodbye. From a very early age, Wilfredo had fought the highest levels of boxing. It was a sad conclusion to a career that was otherwise legendary. Walking away from boxing for Wilfredo would also come with challenges he would have to conquer. Problems with domestic violence, drugs, law enforcement, and family would test Wilfredo outside of the ring after he hung up the gloves. And in 2018, he was fighting for his life again when he found himself in ICU care suffering from a pulmonary edema and pneumonia. His record title defenses won by knockout still stands today at 17. 23 of his fights were title fights, only losing 3 times. Winning and losing by the knockout, Wilfredo knew no other way. As time passed, it feels like many fans forgot what Wilfredo accomplished. When you look at content regarding Wilfredo, it's hard to find any stuff not directly tying him to the Sanchez fight, as if his biggest moment in his career was that loss. Many conveniently forget that Sanchez's biggest win and most legendary moment was against Wilfredo. The win over the Puerto Rican gave Sanchez his aura of world beater, and for as much as people like to glorify Sanchez as some sort of super fighter that was the greatest of all time, which I think is highly debatable given his very limited fight record, he needed the Gomez fight much more than Wilfredo needed him. By the time they fought, Wilfredo was a living legend in boxing. He had been on top of the sport since he was 16. Sanchez needed the exposure Wilfredo came with, but also the legitimateness Wilfredo added to his career. Without Wilfredo, that win is far less important, but it was Wilfredo's myth in boxing, his star power, and his boxing greatness that made that win of great importance. Wilfredo's worst moment came against Sanchez, but it was hardly a knock on his record. After all, he has beaten 2 of 3 Mexican legends he's faced. Pintor and Zarate were true white buffaloes of the sport. Wilfredo had hurt them both in a manner that demanded respect, and all of that seems to be forgotten in one loss after having bounced back from it. The internet likes to remember Sanchez as the world conqueror and Wilfredo as the loudmouth Puerto Rican who had the audacity to think he can beat Sanchez, when truly Wilfredo was the one with the better fundamentals, more power, and intimidating record. Stopping him would be the biggest win in Salvador's career, because the pedigree of Wilfredo's career and skills demanded it. He was a true phenom of the sport, ahead of his time if you really think about it. He is the all-time great for a division where champions include names like Eric Morales, Israel Vasquez, Rafael Marquez, Abner Mares, and Leo Santa Cruz, only to name a few. If he was around today with his record, he would for sure be a pay-per-view attraction. Again, headlining Mexico versus Puerto Rico. His fan-friendly style and power would sell arenas. His skills would keep hardcore boxing fans watching. There is no doubt in my mind, no matter what time in history, Wilfredo Gomez would be a force to be reckoned with. Wilfredo Gomez would always be Bazooka. Remember, if you like our content, like, share, subscribe, and all the information regarding the videos and audio could be found in the description.